I've been fascinated by the money game since I was, like you said, 12 years old. And I've always, seen that money doesn't make the world go round, but it makes things in your life a lot easier if you have some. And so why don't we learn about it? I always say on my podcast, because I have a podcast called the Wealth Architect Podcast, and I tell my viewers and listeners, hey, listen, they spend more time talking about Romeo and Juliet and King Tut and the Pythagorean theorem in our schools than they tell us about, taxes and relationships and buying a car and negotiating a house, mortgage, the stock market. And so if we're not going to educate people, then basically what you have to do is you have to take electives. You have to meet people like me, after your formal education is over and learn about the thing that we use the most every day. And that's money. I use it every day. I don't know about you, but unfortunately, we didn't take any classes or very limited classes taught by people that don't know the game of money. And so I unfortunately have to kind of plug the gap, and so do other people in my business. And I just want to make the world a little bit better place, just to maybe change one person's life at a time.
This is the Play Your Position podcast, where we huddle up, call the plays, and inspire you to run your ball into the end zone. Are you ready to score more game-winning touchdowns in your life, business, and career? Then listen up, because it's game time, baby. Now, here's your host, Mary Lou Kaiser.
Hello, Team PYP. Mary Lou Kaiser here. Welcome to another episode of the Play Your Position podcast. So glad you decided to join me and my guest today. It is game day here at PYP, which means I've got a great conversation in store for you. Someone who has said yes to leadership, who is showing up every day to make this world a better place through education, through examples and role modeling and doing the right thing. His name is Mark Yegge. He comes to us today from Jupiter, Florida. Mark, are you ready for kickoff?
I am so ready for kickoff. Let the kickoff begin.
Yeah, game day is here. So team, here's some things I know about Mark. And again, you're going to want to pay attention because he's talking about a subject everybody secretly loves, and some people openly, and that subject is money. He goes by the wealth architect and has spent his entire life learning and teaching people about wealth and the importance of having a success mindset. He started investing when he was 12 and made enough money to buy his first car at 16. Mark started and later sold his Wall Street software company, the company that ushered in after hours trading. He then, air quote, retired at the age of 39, but not before growing the company from nothing to a $30 million enterprise. Along the way, he garnered all kinds of awards: Small Business of the Year, the Florida 100, and Inc. magazine Fast 500. He was also recognized twice by Deloitte as an Entrepreneur of the Year finalist. He has authored and developed courses around how to use money effectively, how to invest. Some of the titles: Hacking Money, The Cash Flow Machine, Negotiate to Win-Win. And I'm just super excited today because, Mark, you are going to educate us about the current state of investing as we end the year 2022 as of this recording. And people are looking ahead to the new year and thinking, what can I do differently? Where might my money grow better? And so welcome to the show, and let's get going.
Thanks. Let's have some fun. I don't know if I'm going to be able to educate you, but I'll certainly start the process.
Yeah, right. Education is certainly a broad and deep topic, but you can give us some insights. But before we get into the nuts and bolts of what you do, tell us about when you got the call to leadership, Mark. Obviously, I shared with the audience that you have been investing since you were 12, but maybe leadership for you is a larger piece of the puzzle of your life. Can you remember when you realized, yeah, I'm really following this path of leadership? What was going on in your life at the time, and how has leadership shaped what you've done and what you're doing today?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it just takes me back to when I was, I think, in third grade, and I was always getting in trouble. And I had, I was like one of those wise guys, and I was joking around and really never taking anything seriously and getting in trouble. And I think I went to the vice principal's office, and she actually said to me, she said, "You have so much potential and you just don't use it." Actually, it was sixth grade or seventh grade or something like that. And I was like, I kind of got slapped upside the head, and I didn't know what she meant. But sometimes when other people see things in you that you don't see yourself, of course, I was, 11 years old or whatever I was, you start to change your perspective. And, sometimes it just takes one person or one comment or one event. And in this case, that was something that kind of shed me or, put me on a trajectory for leadership. So I started to run for, office in my grade school, my middle school. Then I ran for office and became, class president, those kinds of things. So, I don't know if it was exactly that one thing or a culmination, but certainly it didn't hurt.
Yeah. I like that you pointed out sometimes it takes somebody from the outside to see something in ourselves that we can't see ourselves. And fast forward to today, you are educating people about making good investments, understanding what money is, what it isn't. And you're serving in a role where you probably look at clients and students that work with you and say, gosh, I see so much potential in what you could do with your money. Talk to us about that. What are some of the blind spots that I guess the average person has around money and investing?
Okay, how much time you got?
Yeah, I know. Pick one or two, I guess. There's probably a gazillion.
Yeah, well, let me start with the concept of freedom, and that's a big value that many of us have. In fact, most of us have, and it's so important these days as we're starting to realize that certain personal freedoms have been taken away, or at least voluntarily taken away because of perceived risks and fears. And so I try to live a life, at least this is for me. I believe in having personal freedom. I believe there's lots of different freedoms. There's time freedom, there's location freedom, there's people freedom, there's financial freedom. And I try to live my life, at least for me, based on those principles. So I travel around the world. I run, 3 hedge funds, but I can do it from my laptop with my team. And I try to live in different places because I enjoy having location freedom and the freedom to be with who I want to be when I want to do it. So that's really what the driver is for me. So it's not the money discussion that's the driver. It's the freedom discussion that's the value that drives. And so, but what thing I've been fascinated by the money game since I was, like you said, 12 years old. And I've always seen that money doesn't make the world go round, but it makes things in your life a lot easier if you have some.
Yeah.
And so why don't we learn about it? I always say on my podcast, because I have a podcast called the Wealth Architect Podcast, and I tell my viewers and listeners, hey, listen, they spend more time talking about Romeo and Juliet and King Tut and the Pythagorean theorem in our schools than they tell us about, taxes and relationships and buying a car and negotiating a house, mortgage, the stock market. And so if we're not going to educate people, then basically what you have to do is you have to take electives. You have to meet people like me, after your formal education is over and learn about the thing that we use the most every day. And that's money. I use it every day. I don't know about you.
I do every day.
But unfortunately, we didn't take any classes or very limited classes taught by people that don't know the game of money. And so I unfortunately have to kind of plug the gap. And so do other people in my business. And I just want to make the world a little bit better place, just to maybe change one person's life at a time by teaching them that there are some very simple principles that are not taught, that if you just learn them, then you go from that, there's 4 stages of mastery. And the first one is unconscious incompetence. That's where we don't know what we don't know, right? And most people just are in that area. They don't know what they don't know about finance and wealth and their own money even. And so they either spend it all, or if they have a little bit, they give up their power to somebody else that seemingly is an expert. And I always say, never give up your power in your health, your wealth, or your time. But most people in their wealth say, well, they're a stockbroker, they're a financial planner, they're an accountant, they're a guru. I don't really want to know all this stuff because I was never taught it and I don't care to learn it. I'd rather watch Netflix and give all my power to somebody that I supposedly trust. And if you look at it from the other side, because I do come from the Wall Street side, you realize that those people, while, there is a benefit to having, great financial advisors and great financial people in your life, those people are primarily not trained in portfolio management. They're not trained in the aspects of money. They don't understand that there are certain principles other than the ones that they were taught by their firm. They were primarily taught to be good salespeople. And so their job is to put you in things long-term and make you feel good about it, even when things go down. And you have really no control over what they're doing. You just kind of take their word for it and hope they do the best for you. So I'm trying to change that a little bit.
Okay. Yeah. I love that, oh man, where do I even go with this? Well, first of all, the lack of education around money has certainly been a conversation that's been going on for quite some time. And yet nothing seems to be changing in that regard. I have a nephew who's a senior in high school, about ready to graduate. And, he's taking all these advanced placement classes in history and biology. And again, not knocking it because he wants to go into the sciences. Well, there's certain fields that you have to have the breadth of knowledge. But to your point, I used to be a high school English teacher, and I taught Shakespeare, and I taught The Great Gatsby, which was one of the most fun books to teach because of any novel that we read in the whole curriculum, it was the only one that really addressed the concept of money and whatnot, like the whole new money versus old money and the paradigms. And it was fascinating to the conversations we had. However, that was not a practical how-to with regards to managing credit cards. How do you use debt wisely? When do you invest? What do you invest in? Who can you trust? Where do you even begin the conversation? And it sounds like you always begin with that word freedom, which I resonate with 100%. It's like money is a tool that will allow you to have the kinds of freedom that you listed off. And thank you for doing that, by the way. I've never heard anybody talk about different kinds of freedom. So I made a note of that. That's really cool.
Good.
So I guess, you're existing in the world and you've got amazing tools through your books and your teaching and your programs and such. How does somebody who isn't listening to our conversation, how do we find good people who we can trust? Because we're not going to learn all the things that you know, Mark. I mean, honestly, I don't have time. I have other things that I'm good at, and I do want somebody who can educate me a little bit, but I'm never going to know what you know, but I want my money to do things. So how do you address that with people?
Yeah, a lot to unpack with that question. So obviously you're really good at what you do, at least in this format. So thank you. It starts with a belief system. And if you have a belief that, and you just said one, so I'm going to call you out a little bit, that you'll never know what I know. Well, that's true. If you use that belief system to disempower yourself and say, well, throw your hands up in the air and say, you know what, I'm not going to even try. Well, then you are going to put your hands in the trust, or your trust in the hands of somebody that you believe has more knowledge. And it ends up being a trust relationship. And as you can see from, there's a cryptocurrency exchange that has failed and it's taking down other exchanges, and it's a big domino effect going on. That was all based on trust. People trusted this person. In fact, one of my hedge funds used FTX as an exchange. I just didn't trust them. I pulled my Bitcoin off of that exchange, because I believe that there's, a lack of trust in that industry anyway. And it's a sovereign industry. In other words, if you're in that industry, you need to understand that you are in control. Kind of my whole theme, right? You are in control. And so if you pull your Bitcoin, they say not your keys, not your coins. The keys are your protective words that protect your coin. And if you leave it on an exchange, you're trusting somebody else entirely with that amount of money. It could be some people's net worth. There's 1 million people that got hammered with that. Well, maybe we'll talk about that in a bit, but I'm getting off. But the point is, if you can continue to leave your trust, even with the most trustworthy people, like Sam Bankman-Fried, like Bernie Madoff, like the Enron guys, the history is riddled with the tracks of people that have blown trust, maybe because of their own greed, or maybe because there were sinister reasons. Then, unfortunately, you get swept into that you leave yourself exposed. And I just don't think you need to leave yourself exposed. So what I want to tell you to combat that belief is that it's not that hard. Like there's just a few steps, a few frameworks that you need to learn. And it could take you maybe 2 hours. And it's something that could affect the rest of your life. You don't have to know the strategies that I know about creating reliable income in the stock market. I teach that in a course, but you could just start with, what's my savings strategy? What's my strategy to start to invest? What's my strategy to build a financial team around me so that I don't have to know everything they're doing? I can just be let's use your analogies, right? I can just be the coach. I'm not going to go out there and throw the ball, run the ball, and do all the blocking, but I'm going to know what's going on with my teammates and members so that we can get the result that we draw up as a vision together.
Okay. So what is the book or the program that you have that listeners could check out to learn that 2-hour block? I like that. That's doable.
Well, thank you. I have a book called Hacking Money. I didn't think we were going to be talking about it, but that's great. It's more of an entry-level book. It's the reason I came up with the title is because of this exact conversation. Is most people think it's really hard, but there's a way to hack a lot of things. There's a way to get the quick knowledge. And I think I put it together in that 180-page book. And it's actually a fun read and it's pretty easy to understand. Look, if we talk about the stock market, people are like, oh, the stock market's going down. And there's, 8,000 stocks that we could talk about, right? And then there's mutual funds. There's 10,000 mutual funds. Well, you can get overwhelmed at any section that you want. But if you just talk about finance, well, there's a role to play in certain assets. I think people should have some exposure to the stock market or business, soft assets. People should have some exposure to hard assets, real estate, gold. People should have some exposure to tech assets like cryptocurrencies, because technology is certainly playing a huge role in our lives. People should just have some exposure. And then if you just learn about those things, now you go from that unconscious incompetence to that conscious competence, that level where, or conscious incompetence, where you're like, okay, now I know what I don't know. Let me start to shore up some of those things so that if I do want, like you, to get somebody to control them, I can at least watch what they're doing and I can understand when they explain their strategy to me to decide a little bit deeper if this is the person that should be handling my money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautifully said. And going back to something that you said earlier about, really, it's about our mindset and having our values and principles clearly identified.
Yeah.
And then that drives the behavior towards finding the resource like your book, or finding the person like yourself who we can actually have a conversation with. And I really want to acknowledge you for calling me out with that disempowering language. We do all of us do it all the time. And it's so it's like, oh yeah, I didn't even realize that I really did give away my power by saying I'm never going to learn that stuff.
Yeah.
That's a barrier. And I know, especially around money, because I've had several conversations over the years on this show and certainly in my private life, that because of the lack of across the board fundamental education around money, the emotional toil, the turmoil that conversation, there are people who just refuse to talk about money at all because A, it terrifies them. B, they don't want to look stupid. So I'm not going to bring it up at all, right? C, they are aware that they're incompetent, or maybe they've made some decisions that led to some outcomes they weren't happy with. And you brought up crypto. So let's go there, because crypto is becoming a part of the conversation. And from my vantage point, I think hardly anybody really understands what it is. I know certainly people in my life just sit there and their eyes cross and they roll back in their head because they immediately think it's Bitcoin. That's all that they associate with crypto. And I realize we don't have time for you to educate us on the whole crypto scene, but the news has definitely been focusing on the FTX collapse and the ripple effect that that's had. What can you tell us about the role that crypto is playing now and where you see it going, Mark? Because that's one of the things that I was, when I was reading about you, you say crypto's going to massively change our lives. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. I'd just like to address one thing that I think is really important. You touched on it, and I think it needs a little bit more definition, and that is that money equals emotion. Why is that? It's because we have so much stored attachment to money, right? And it does become an emotional basket, right? I mean, it's the number one cause of divorce, bigger than, bad sex or, you putting the toilet paper over or under, right? So, you've got to understand it. And it's loaded with things because of our limbic system says, you know what, if you lose all your money, you're going to starve to death. Well, in this society, in this country, we're not going to starve to death. There's always, that's a false fear.
Sure.
But then nonetheless, it's built into us. So I always tell my people in my mastermind group that money is emotion. And when you have emotions ruling your trading decisions, they're poor decisions. So I always say money goes up, emotions goes down, and vice versa, right? When emotions go up, intelligence goes down is what I should have said. When emotions go up, intelligence goes down. So, you start making stupid decisions. I don't know about you, but the lousiest decisions I've ever made is when I've been emotional. So
absolutely, 100%.
And that leads us into that cryptocurrency question, because cryptocurrency is this fantastic technology. I'll just take a second to kind of bring you up to speed so your eyes don't glaze over if you're listening to this. And cryptocurrency is something called the blockchain. So let's just imagine that you and me and maybe your listener are sitting around a coffee table, and I have this blank journal and we want to write a story. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write the first line of the story. I'm going to write, the dog bit Johnny. And then what you're going to do is you're going to look at my sentence, because I'm going to pass the book to you, and you're going to go, well, Mark wrote the dog bit Johnny. Let me write my sentence. Mm-hmm. And Johnny screamed. Right? So you put your entry in there. Now you pass it to your listener, and your listener goes, well, what did Mary Lou say? Oh, and Johnny screamed. That's right. And Mark said, the dog bit Johnny. So now we're starting to build a story, right? They add their comment, then it passes to me, and we start to verify what's ever been written. And you can't change anything that's ever been written. That's the blockchain. We write this gigantic book, this story in this journal, but it can never be changed. Once the first sentence is in there, it will always be in there. And so blockchain has been an evolution for many, many years, but it's really come into formality. I think it was January 3rd, 2009, when Satoshi Nakamoto, who we don't know who it is, we don't know if it's a group, when it's a mysterious thing, which is really fascinating about Bitcoin if you want to learn more about it. But this person, group, whatever, created this white paper called Bitcoin. And it described in just a few pages about how it was going to be done. And so Bitcoin, what I just described in that book, is the blockchain, and it's an immutable ledger. Everything we ever do in finance is a ledger-based system. When we put money into the bank, it's a liability for the bank. It's an asset for us. There's 2 ledger entries that happen for every transaction. When you buy something, there's a seller. There's always a ledger-based system. And this is an immutable ledger, can't be changed. And it can't be hacked because, the more people that are writing this blockchain story, the thousands and thousands, and I run my own Bitcoin node now to verify the blockchain, you can't change it unless you have a gigantic, massive majority to be able to change it. When thousands and millions of people are running the same nodes, all verifying the past transactions that have happened and all vying for the future transactions so they can get paid in a Bitcoin, then it becomes a very secure network. So Bitcoin itself, and I'm talking about Bitcoin rather than the other cryptos on purpose, Bitcoin itself has become the largest computer network that human beings have ever created. And which is fascinating because now it's a network that's called a layer 1 protocol. It can be built upon, and people are building things like the Lightning Network and the Liquid Network to do other things to take the internet to the next layer of decentralization. So That's a key word. That's a key word. Now let me go into, so that's Bitcoin. There's Bitcoin, and then there's all the other coins. We call them, well, I can't say it on your show, but it rhymes with bit. That usually means poop. So you've got Bitcoins and you've got the other coins, right?
Yeah.
And they're all based on their own blockchains. The difference is, and just if you learn nothing else from us talking here today, your listeners should just at least learn that Bitcoin is decentralized. All those nodes, there's no person, there's no CEO, there's no group of people that can change the rules. The rules are already written and they've been there for 13 years and it's never been changed, never been hacked. The other ones are all centralized. So the world is moving to decentralization, right? We move from the internet and we move to now where we have control of many different places. How many TV channels did we have when we were growing up? 3, 4, 5, right? Now we've got hundreds and hundreds of choices, right? That's because there's decentralization. It doesn't go all to one place. You can get your news from many places. There's not
Instagram.
one social exactly. Twitter, Instagram. Yeah. And so the world is digitizing. Almost everything has become digitized. Books became digitized first, right? With Amazon. And now almost everything that we buy can be, on Amazon or competitors, Etsy and Shopify. So what has been decentralized, unfortunately, for many, many years is our money. And that's moving to a decentralized way. And Bitcoin solves that problem because you can take control of your own money, keep it on your own wallet, have total control with it. You don't even have to have a physical wallet. You can just memorize 12 or 24 words, and you can take your Bitcoin with you anywhere around the world. Think about if you were in Afghanistan when the Taliban took over and they shut down all the banks. If you were a merchant that had your net worth tied up in a bank, you lost it all because they took it. But if you had put it into Bitcoin, you can walk across the border, you can send it to somebody, you can do whatever you want. And it gives you that empowerment that previously had to go through a centralized authority. And one more thought on it, and I know I'm running a little bit long here, but one more thought
fascinating.
Is it's changing the world because the world is primarily unbanked. You and I can't swing a dead cat in our towns without hitting 10 banks, right?
True.
But imagine the person in Nigeria or Sudan that has never seen a bank. They don't have one. They live out in the middle of nowhere in the desert, and they go to work for barter, or they go to work and they're oppressed by somebody because they only have one choice. Well, with a $50 phone, Android phone, and a free app, you can now become your own banker. And we don't see it here. We have so many conveniences, but when you have the ability to send money across space and time on a weekend, which we can't do even now with our centralized system, right? You can't send a wire to somebody, in Greece at 5:00 on a Saturday night. You have to wait till Monday. The bank's open, right? Bitcoin gives you the ability to become your own banker. The other coins are centralized. They have a figurehead that's running them. They have a group of people that can change the rules. As you've seen with the FTX debacle, people they're greedy and they create their own coins out of thin air. And then they bankrupt those coins, get money against them, and they steal people's money. And it doesn't always happen, but it happens if you get a bad player in there.
Yeah, which clearly there were.
Yeah, it certainly looks that way.
It's halftime here at the Play Your Position podcast, and we've got ourselves a great game. While you're up grabbing another snack and topping off your favorite beverage, make sure to subscribe to the show so you never miss another play. PYP is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever great podcasts can be found. Now, let's get back to the game.
The downside to that is then it makes people even more apprehensive and fearful about this new technology, which it really is. That's what Sure. Crypto is. I remember reading, I don't know, it was probably 10 years ago. I was not one of the fortunate ones that bought Bitcoin for 50 cents or something, and made my fortune, right? But I remember I was listening to a podcast. I don't remember whose it was, but they were talking about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. And I'm a curious person, so I decided I would do some reading about it. And I stumbled across an article that said essentially where people get confused or don't understand is the power is not the Bitcoin, it's the blockchain. The blockchain is the thing. And I remember thinking to myself, how interesting, and I didn't know what you just shared about Bitcoin being decentralized and all the others not. That was a really like an aha moment for me, and I'm sure my listeners as well, because this is so new, Mark. I mean, this is the way that the world is changing, and the way technology and the internet and the whole digital life is really meshing in with real life, the natural world. The speed at which it's happening and has happened is mind-boggling. Yes. And so, I'm grateful that I get to have conversations with people like you who are way smarter. And I say this not to disempower myself. It's a fact. You are way smarter about this because you live in this world. But if this is where we're headed, I think we owe ourselves to learn.
Yes, you do. I love that.
We really do. Not to put our heads in the sand and say, oh, it's a passing fad, the way I remember, and you may remember this too, back in 2007 and 2008, when social media started to make its presence. And I read all over the place, oh, it's just a fad. It's just a fad. And I thought, man, these people are really either not smart or don't want to address the elephant in the room for whatever reason they have, because it terrifies them, because it conflicts with their value system. I mean, whatever the reason is, it doesn't matter. I just was I went the other way. I said, this is where we're headed.
Sure.
This is where we're headed. And certainly the internet has come of age, and now it in its maturing state, we're looking at, you use the word layer, the next layers, the next levels of the internet. Gosh, I mean, what else can you tell us about what we need to be paying attention to when it comes to growing our money that we work hard to earn?
Okay. Well, let's talk about Bitcoin for just a second, because there's a lesson in there, and it's just a basic economics lesson on supply and demand. So the government, you've heard of the government printing money, right? The Fed prints money.
Right.
And that's created this gigantic inflationary bubble, because in 2000, we basically shut our economy down for almost 2 years and said, just go home, don't give this disease to anybody, sit down and shut up, and we'll pay you some money to be able to live and buy you some groceries. And of course, there was some corruption in there, as many, many people applied for money they didn't deserve and got many millions, but that's part of what happens in government programs. So the government created all of this money out of nothing. Now, when you create something out of nothing, there's no scarcity. And when something is not scarce, it loses its value. So the dollar has lost its purchasing power. We printed more money in the last 2 years than we've printed in the entire existence of the United States. And so the money purchasing power problem has now come home to roost, where, I went to buy some eggs the other day, and they were $6.85 a dozen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, I bought them for $1.23 2 years ago.
Yep.
So, it's not eggs are going up, 7% like they tell us, or 8%. I mean, that's a quadrupling of the price of eggs. Now, maybe I like really good eggs, or my chickens are, massaged or something every day, but, but the scarcity component is incredibly important. Now, back to Bitcoin. Bitcoin will only have 21 million Bitcoin ever minted, right? They've already minted 19.2 million. And the last Bitcoin will be minted in the year 2140. So we've got a long runway where Bitcoin continues to grow, but it grows by design at an ever slowing pace. So rather than printing something into infinity and having it lose buying power, like the dollar, I don't know if you know this, but since 1913, the dollar has lost 99.6% of its value.
I did not know that.
In purchasing power. So it creeps up on us so slowly that we don't think it's a big deal. It's a little bit of a big deal now with the price of eggs and everything else. But 2% a year, we suck it up, and we're like, oh, we're making more money. Our houses are worth more. Well, it's not that the houses are worth more. They're still the same. It's just that our purchasing power of our dollar has gone so far down. That's because there's an infinite supply of money. If I gave you a rose, Mary Lou, you'd be like, oh, Mark, that's sweet. As long as you're not allergic or something. But you'd be like,
or it's all covered with thorns and I get scratched.
Right. But if I gave you 2 roses, you'd be like, oh, that's nice. If I gave you, another rose the next day and another rose the next day, you'd still be pretty excited about roses. But what if I showed up at your house and I filled your entire room with roses, and you were covered in thorns and roses and red petals? Like, you'd be like, these are annoying. I have no use for these stupid roses. Get them out of my house. And so they would lose the value because there's no scarcity, right? There was scarcity when you got one. You'd be like, oh, it's pretty. I'm going to put it in a vase. I'll put that little fertilizer stuff in the bottom, whatever you do with roses. And you'd be like, right? So in Bitcoin's case, as opposed to all the other coins, there is scarcity. There's only going to be 21 million ever made. And if you own one Bitcoin, you own 1/21 millionth of whatever position Bitcoin will play in the future. And I don't think it's going to replace the dollar. I don't think it's going to replace gold. I just think it's a really great alternative to each of those, and it can sit easily alongside of it. So you mentioned the internet earlier. We are at the very beginning of what's called an S curve, right? It starts at the bottom and then it accelerates really quickly. Think about Amazon. They were like, we're going to sell books. And everybody's like, yeah, I'd like to hold my book. And so they sold books in electronic format after a while. And then pretty soon they're selling everything. And now we all look back at the beginning and go, boy, I wish I bought Amazon back then, 20 years ago. Well, we're at that very beginning of book selling right now with the blockchain. And some of the other cryptocurrencies have value. They just don't have value if you're looking at them as money. They have lots of cool projects and things behind them. There's smart contracts and there's other ways that they're going to be able to provide value. And it's a really great technology because it does lead to some decentralization. But Bitcoin for money is the one. And the last comment I'll make on that is that, you touched on it. We owe it to ourselves to learn about cryptocurrency. I didn't want to make this all about crypto, but it's a part of their money. We're going to be using it in 5 years. So you might as well learn about it now, at least so you can have some of that control.
Right. And just as a disclaimer to everybody listening, I mean, neither Mark nor I are telling you what to do with your money. This is really educational only. And yeah. I'm a firm believer in self-education. So if you're interested in learning about any kind of investments, whether it's crypto or the stock market or gold or real estate, do your due diligence, find the people that maybe, again, like a show like this introduces you to, or do your own search and really, use critical thinking skills, which is unfortunately in shorter and shorter supply. Not PYP. Team PYP is really smart, but I do have concern for the upcoming generations because so much of their time is being invested. You mentioned Netflix, in scrolling, the death scroll of social media, and they're not reading and they're not sitting in, you mentioned the pandemic. I mean, that you want to talk about stifling our freedom. I mean, that was like, let's constrict everybody, but we'll give you just a little bit to keep you thinking like, oh, this is good. And we're out of that now, but we're just in the very beginning. And so, everything that you've shared so far, Mark, has really piqued my interest. And you mentioned, so we've talked about crypto. What else can you share with us about making some smart decisions with, outside of, just to recap some of the highlights, know your values, come up with a strategy, do your due diligence. I mean, the news is going to highlight the misery.
Yes.
That's what the news is gets paid to do. Yes. So take what you hear on the news with a grain of salt, always cross check. But for listeners who are like, I'm just not quite ready to do the crypto, but I'd love to create some safe, reliable passive income from the stock market. Where do you start, or how do you add on to what you've already been doing?
Well, if you've got a decent knowledge about the market, that's great. We start with saving. Normally, I have 5 steps to wealth, but we normally start with saving. But you're never going to save your way to wealth. You save to invest. The top of the pyramid there is education, though. So you have to educate yourself. Then you use that education to take some of the money that you make, and rather than spend it, save it. And the savings is just there to get enough that you can use that savings as an opportunity. Because most people get an opportunity in front of them, they're like, well, I can't invest in it because I don't have any money. And so then they come up with disempowering beliefs like, well, it takes money to make money. I don't have any money, so therefore I'll never be rich. And they take themselves out. And so then you have to learn the right levels of investment. And that's kind of what I do every day. I have a course called the Cash Flow Machine, where we teach you how to make money on the stock market. And it's very similar to the real estate market, right? You buy it, they always tell you buy a house and then you rent it out to somebody and they pay off your mortgage and you get rich. And there's some truth to it, but it's not really what they call passive income, because I've had my share of real estate and it didn't prevent me from having to get up at 2:00 in the morning and go plunge a toilet. So, part of, getting wealthy is that you have to kind of put a little bit of labor behind it. But, we teach people how to do that with the stock market without the plungers. You buy a stock like Amazon or, Apple or Tesla, and you rent out the stock to people that are willing to gamble, and you basically create income from those gamblers. We're like the house. So we teach people how to do that. It's an advanced strategy. That. Yeah, it's really fantastic. A lot of the big firms do it. Warren Buffett does it. And we go really deep on this strategy. It's called the cash flow machine. And, I can give you a link at the end if anybody's interested in doing this. And you can do it for yourself, or if you don't want to do it for yourself, I've got hedge funds for accredited investors that can do it. But primarily, I want you to learn how to do it. I've got free courses all over the place to teach you certain things about it. I've got, small entry fee courses, all kinds of stuff, because I think this is like a really cool way to make money. And it's not that hard, and it doesn't take that much time.
Right.
So, but it doesn't matter to me if you buy my course, you buy somebody else's course, or if you surf around YouTube 20 minutes a night. Like, you'd be amazed at how many things you can learn for free just zipping around YouTube. 20 minutes a day. Think about 20 minutes a day. That's what, 140 minutes a week?
It's nothing.
A couple of hours in a week, you're ready to rock and roll. Like, you got some knowledge of the financial business. You can watch stuff from Ray Dalio, one of the most successful hedge funds managers of all time, that gives you principles of not only living your life, but principles on how to invest. There's tons of stuff out there. So, take control of what you do. Learn about this game of money. You're using money anyway. You might as well learn about it, and then start to hone your knowledge that you don't get, unfortunately, in the schools, by seeking out people that have other ways to learn that are not taught by the news, that are not taught by Wall Street, because they have their own agenda. Learn your own stuff.
Right. Yeah. Right. Which is counterintuitive, but often those are the best. I have found, my personal experience is when you're a contrarian to what everybody else is doing. One of my favorite frameworks or ways of thinking is the opposite of courage is not cowardice, it's conformity. It's when you just fall into the path of everybody else. I think I was a big fan of the Transcendentalists when I was in college. I discovered Transcendentalism and, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau living out at Walden Pond. And, that was his own little ruse. We've all come to find out, he was hopping into town here and there. It wasn't like, I'm living off the land the way he made it out to be. However, he came up with some pretty pithy ideas, including, the massive men lead lives of quiet desperation. And if you are, how many people are walking the same path, that generational, this is how we've always done it in my family. And it's hard. It's hard to be strong in the face of those that you love and care about, who want to discount your ideas, who want to tell you that you're wrong, that you're a fool, which can be even worse. You're stupid, or even ostracize you because they're like, well, so and so is really flipped their lid. They're going on, and then what is it, that fable about the little red hen who asks everybody, to help her get the grain to make the bread, and I'm too busy, and I've got to take a nap and everything, and then they all want to come eat her bread. Yeah, I'm sure you've met people who made their fortunes, Mark, and there were a lot of people along the way who they thought loved them and who shunned them on their path because it didn't conform.
Yep.
Well,
I've always marched to the beat of a different drum, and I resonate a lot with what you say, because a lot of people, even especially now that I talk about Bitcoin, they just can't put their brain around it because it doesn't really exist in a physical form. So I understand the concept, but people think I'm crazy, investing in this, and and being so into it. And I believe that if you don't spend 100 hours, which is 100 hours, I just talked about 140 hours, or no, it was 140 minutes, wasn't it? But 100 hours, I went pretty deep into Bitcoin. And in the first 10 hours, I understood it. But in the beginning, I was just like everybody else. Oh, this will never work. This is, it's going to get hacked and the government's going to shut it down. All these objections that come from ignorance.
Yeah.
And it's not until you get education that you start to have epiphanies. It's not until you start to get to that conscious incompetence where I was like, okay, now I know what I don't know. I better start to understand this, because pretty soon it's going to be sweeping. And we've got so much adoption in Bitcoin that people don't see. And it's the one that's held up through all this FTX stuff.
Right.
But the bottom line there, to go back to your premise, is that, people will, if you march to the beat of a different drum, those are the ones that are going to do well. They have the most potential. If you conform, you're just going to be like the masses. You're going to be like everyone else. They always say the masses are the asses. Let's not be like the masses, everybody. PYP. Let's get together here and
right.
Work as a team and figure out for ourselves what we need to do so that we can all kind of move forward and have a place in the world and change the world.
I love that spirit of, just enterprise and I think people are wired differently, and it's okay for people who want to play it safe. There's nothing wrong with that. I think if you're consciously aware that that's the path you've chosen, that's great.
Yeah.
But don't complain. Don't complain that, my life is so. Take a look at what you want to change. That's something I really have zero tolerance for. People who complain about their life, especially people who from general principles have it really good.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, if you're unhappy about X, Y, or Z, why aren't you doing something to change it? Or is it that you get attention from complaining and that's feeding you? Well, that's a different story.
Yeah, exactly.
But with money, it's certainly, oh boy, people, like you said some things all the time. You have to have money to make money. There's all these, I don't even know, can't think of the word that you would use to describe those myths.
Yeah,
that's a common one. Or that rich people are evil and out to take advantage of the little guy. Boy, I hear that all the time. Just in me being out and about in the world, I overhear conversations. People. It's amazing what people are willing to talk about in public places.
Yeah.
Well, as we come to the end of this has been such a great conversation, Mark. And as we were saying in the pre-chat, we could talk for hours, I think, about so many things. Could you share with listeners? You shared you have these great courses and books, and certainly I'll put links to those on your show notes page at pyppodcast.com. But what are a couple of books that have served you well on your leadership journey to become as confident as you are and also as knowledgeable?
Well, I would just tell you the story. I mentor students from entrepreneurial graduate school programs. And most of them are well-meaning. They call me and they want me to mentor them. And I say, well, great. Tell me about yourself. And then after I do that, I say, let's see if you're invested in this process, because I love to teach people, but I want people that are willing to do some work to learn it, because I don't think knowledge that's just dumped on you, it sticks.
It doesn't.
And so I send people back to do some work. And I'm like, okay, here are the 3 books that I want you to read. So I'll tell you the 3 books. The first is Dale Carnegie wrote it over 107 years ago, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Human relations are the most important thing, more important than money, more important than anything else. If you can't get along with people, if you don't understand how to win them over to your way of thinking, if you don't understand how to just be a likable person, you're going to have a lot of problems. And I think right now we don't teach any of that stuff.
We don't.
And people are learning how to text really well and how to play games really well and how to be in that world. But then when they have to interact on a personal level, it's very difficult. So human relations is important. How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie is important. And the second book that he wrote is How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. Also a great book. But the first one, if you're going to choose one, is the one to pick. The second book is a little bit more about wealth, but it's actually more about living your life. And it's called Think and Grow Rich, also written almost 100 years ago by a guy named Napoleon Hill, who was hired by Andrew Carnegie, who was our steel magnate, one of the richest people in the world 100 years ago. And he said, I want to know what makes people successful. And so he hired this journalist named Napoleon Hill, and he went on a 25-year quest. And, Carnegie opened up his Rolodex to him and said, interview all of my friends, Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, Westinghouse, all of these, Rockefeller, and go interview them and write a book, write knowledge so that we can gain it. What makes people successful? That was the Think and Grow Rich book, which is essentially 17 principles of wealth, but also of living your life, right?
Yep.
And so the third one is definitely about money. And that is, and I got hundreds of them that I could recommend, but these are the top three that I tell people that want to be mentored. And, I make them come back and give me a little synopsis of it. But it's a book by Robert Kiyosaki, written about 20 years ago called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And he also wrote another book called Cash Flow Quadrant. Two books that basically say, hey, look, money is too important to put it in the hands of somebody else. And if you're putting your money in the hands of somebody else, you're probably being programmed by the general thinking, the mass, psychosis of money. And if you don't learn the rules about money, like one of them he always says, and I agree with, is your house is not an asset. People think, if I just buy a house, I'm not throwing money away on rent. But, you buy a house and it's a liability because you spend money on it. And then when the kitchen has to be remodeled, you have to spend money on it, not the bank, even though they're getting the money. And when you need to put in, a new roof or a new air conditioner, you're paying for it, not the bank. So you're basically paying the bank while you sit there in a nice house for sure, but it's not an asset. It's a place to live. I put it in its own category. We all need a place to live and we all have to pay for it. And yes, you might think it goes up in value, but like I talked about the dollar a minute ago, it's a different paradigm. So those are the three books. You asked a short question, I gave you a long answer. How to Win Friends and Influence People, Think and Grow Rich, and Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki.
Fantastic. And I love the fact that you have this barrier that people can't just work with you, that they have to demonstrate their commitment to really owning the knowledge and making it a part of themselves. And all three of those books require paradigm shifts, and paradigm shifts are not easy and they take time. And I think Think and Grow Rich has probably been the most recommended book on my show since I've been asking the question. And what you said about the fact that it was a 25-year journey for Hill to create that book. People today have no concept of time. They want everything now. There's the whole with technology like Snapchat, a whole generation was influenced by things disappearing, that they have no value, that a moment in time is just a moment of time. Now, if you follow Buddhist principles, there is some value in that we only have this moment and that now it's gone. And, 5 moments ago no longer exist and So there's that side of things. However, there's also the sense of this universal wisdom and the lasting, like we humans don't change. You go back. True. Yes, our diseases may be different. Maybe we're growing taller because people have access to better nutrition and so forth and so on. But as far as the human experience goes, we're born, we go through phases, and because we live as long as we do now, and then when we die, there's an expiration date for every one of us. And within that period of time, what on earth are you going to do with it? And I'm just so grateful, Mark, that there are people like you who have a little bit of that contrarian spirit, or a lot of it. You're definitely got the renegade in you, which is a positive thing. You're talking to one right now. I'm definitely not conventional by any stretch. And these kinds of conversations are what help people make a decision to take different action, even if it's small. One step can make such a big difference over time. And before we say goodbye, would you be willing to tell us who your team is? You said you're a big football fan. I'd like to hear you talk about who are you watching on Sunday?
Well, I've got two teams that are both 6-6 right now, and one of them is Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but they are leading the division. That's who I watch on Sunday. On Saturdays, I watch the Florida Gators. Unfortunately, this year, but yeah, for some reason, I grew up in the Tampa Bay area. I love the Buccaneers, and when Tom Brady came there a couple of years ago, I was like, "Oh, this is going to be great," and it was, and it still actually is. If you watch the game Monday night, he's just an amazing player.
He really is. And one last thing is tell us where you hang out online. Where can people learn more about you? Are you on any of the social channels? If so, which ones?
Yeah, I think I'm on all of them. I spend my time mostly on Twitter. It's at Mark Yegge. If you put in Mark Yegge Wealth Architect on any other platform, the search should bring it up. I have a YouTube channel where you can learn my thoughts on macroeconomic things that are going on in Europe and El Salvador and the United States. So I like to put out visual content, and my podcast is there as well. I have a podcast called the Wealth Architect Podcast. So if you put in Wealth Architect or Mark Yegge, Yegge, you'll find me. And if you're interested in pursuing a little bit more about what we teach in the stock market, it's cashflowmachine.io.
Nice.
Cashflowmachine.io.
So many great resources for you, Team PYP. And again, you'll find links to these and more on Mark's show notes page at pyppodcast.com. And I really hope you take advantage of his hours and hours and probably years, his life dedicated to understanding the money game. And I love that you said it takes some time, but it's not hard. Just a decision to invest in yourself so that you can have more of those 4 kinds of freedom that he mentioned. And I'm sure there's more than those, but I love going back to how we started this conversation, Mark. I love that you made the distinctions. It's not just about time freedom. It's really being able to do what you want, where you want, with whoever you want. That's a beautiful thing.
It's not for everybody, but I love it. That's how I live. Yeah,
I love it. And I have loved this so much. And thank you for spending some time with me and Team PYP here at Play Your Position. I'm just thrilled that we've connected.
Thank you so much. This was really fun. Super, super fun. Thank you.
Hey team, Mary Lou here. Who's number one in football changes from year to year. Fashion trends come and go, same with musical tastes. But leadership skills, they never go out of style. In fact, these days, leadership is an essential survival skill for a world that demands more from us than ever before. To succeed these days, you need to know how to show up for yourself so that you can then do the work you love with people you like the way you want. The Play Your Position Leadership Playbook helps you do this, and it's free. Go to pyppodcast.com to download your copy today. If being more successful this year, next year, in the 21st century is on your to-do list, get your copy of the Play Your Position Leadership Playbook now. pyppodcast.com. It's at the top of the page. You can't miss it. That's pyppodcast.com, and start being more of the leader you are meant to be today. This podcast was produced by Daniel Romeros. Show notes for this episode can be found over at pyppodcast.com. I'm Mary Lou Kaiser. Thanks for listening.
Here at the Play Your Position podcast, we believe that the road to self-mastery and a life well lived starts with answering the call to leadership. That's when the fun really begins. Send this episode to any friends who might need to hear the inspiration and ideas you heard today. And feel free to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform.